यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यामुनतिरवनचारी ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयं मुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवतेरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। शृण्वता स्वकथा कृष्ण पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तनः हृदयन्तस्थो यभद्राणि विधुनोति सुहृत्सताम्। Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back for our daily Srimad Bhagavatam discussion. We are currently in Canto 3, Chapter 26, Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. Today we'll be discussing verse 27 and verse 28. Verse 27. Vaikarikadvikurvanan manastatvam ajayata yat sankalpa vikalpabhyam vartate kama sambhavaha. Synonyms: Vaikarikat, from the false ego of goodness. Vikurvanat, undergoing transformation. Manaha, the mind. Tattvam, principle. Ajayata, evolved. Yat, whose. Sankalpa, thoughts. Vikalpabhyam, and by reflections. Vartate, happens. Kama sambhavaha, the rise of desire. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Chandar Vividha Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: from the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections gives rise to desire. Purport: the symptoms of the mind are determination and rejection, which are due to different kinds of desires. We desire that which is favorable to our sense gratification, and we reject that which is not favorable to sense gratification. The material mind is not fixed, but the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, as long as the mind is on the material platform, it is hovering, and all this rejection and acceptance is asat, temporary. It is stated that he whose mind is not fixed in Krishna consciousness must hover between acceptance and rejection. However advanced a man is in academic qualifications, as long as he is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will simply accept and reject, and will never be able to fix his mind on a particular subject matter. Verse 28. Yad vidurhi anuruddhakyam rishikanam adhishwaram sarendri saren sorry Saradendivarasyamam samarhadyam yogibhi sanai. Synonyms: yet, which mind, with who is known, he, indeed, Aniruddha Akhyam, by the name Aniruddha, Rishikanam, of the senses, Adhishwaram, the supreme ruler, Sarada, autumnal, in Indivara, like a blue lotus, Shyamam, bluish, Samradhyam, who is found, Yogibihi, by the yogis, Shanai, gradually. Translation: the mind of the living entity is known by the name of Lord Aniruddha, the supreme ruler of the senses. He possesses a bluish black form resembling a lotus flower growing in the autumn. He is found slowly by the yogis. Purport: the system of yoga entails controlling the mind, and the lord of the mind is Aniruddha. It is stated that Aniruddha is four-handed, with Sudarshana Chakra, conch shell, club, and lotus flower. There are 24 forms of Vishnu, each differently named. Among these 24 forms, Sankarshana, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, and Vasudeva are depicted very nicely in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it is stated that Aniruddha is worshipped by the yogis. Meditation upon voidness is a modern invention of the fertile brain of some speculator. Actually, the process of yoga meditation, as prescribed in this verse, should be fixed upon the form of Aniruddha. By meditating on Aniruddha, one can become free from the agitation of acceptance and rejection. When one's mind is fixed upon Aniruddha, one gradually becomes God realized. He approaches the pure status of Krishna consciousness, which is the ultimate goal of yoga. Hare Krishna. Um, Before we start, and also respecting the privacy of the family, today actually was as per schedule. It was of a different devotee, but due to a very difficult circumstance and situation that the family is going through, I'm taking up this discussion. But before we start, I wanted to dedicate this class and anything, the prayers and everything, for the strength of that family, what they're going through, quite difficult time. So that's my humble prayer to Shishi Radha Shyam Sundar, that may they give whatever strength and comfort for the family that they feel is best. So wanted to start the discussion, uh, remembering the family. But even before we get into the actual discussion of the verse, I had something personal to share other than what I just spoke. Was anytime I would prepare like this service of preparing for Bhagavatam class and giving Bhagavatam, like this discussion of Bhagavatam, in some ways has been like quite soothing and empowering for me. But anytime I would prepare for Srimad Bhagavatam, or sit here and present Bhagavatam class, I always do feel like an imposter, because every verse that I get to prepare or speak are kind of far beyond my capacity to just to even kind of grasp it, let alone realize them. And like the devotees who sit here on a day by day basis, hearing them, and when I'm kind of representing them sitting here, it just feels like an imposter. So that's like it's a big thing, right? Like the imposter syndrome, which is quite prominent nowadays, and somehow it's been quite a prominent thought in my consciousness for quite some time. So, but to my great solace, I actually was recently hearing one discussion by a devotee, and he was sharing something before he started a class. He was sharing something, and I felt it gave me a great solace. So I just wanted to share with all of us. So he said that when a student is practicing either writing or reading, and especially my kids being in that age where we are trying to, as part of our homeschooling, we are trying to kind of inculcate the habit of writing and reading. I was able to correlate more to that. So when a student is practicing either writing or reading, or anything as part for them, so he needs to repeat the same activity multiple times, just to for initially to kind of get a taste towards that activity, because no student might want to actually, there are very few students that we know who relish reading, but far more number of students like me, they don't relish the activity of writing or reading. um, so for a student, in order for him to progress further in the field of work that he is in, he needs to repeat the same activity multiple times, just to get initially to get the taste of it, and then to actually kind of go further. So the devotee was saying that similarly for a sadhaka, when they are being put in this position of speaking or reading or reciting Srimad Bhagavatam, there is this huge feeling of that, oh, I don't have any taste for this. I'm an imposter. What I'm speaking is based on what I heard from the previous acharyas. There's nothing in my heart that I'm speaking out. But just the act of sitting in this position, and just the act of preparing for the Srimad Bhagavatam discussion, or just our own personal reading, is nothing but it is not just an activity of grasping knowledge, but it is just our earnest prayer to the Lord, who is again sitting in front of us in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. Basically, it's in some ways not trying to grasp the knowledge, but requesting the Lord that by sitting here, I'm not able to. It's again the story of the South Indian Brahman in the case of Lord Chaitanya. He was completely upside down when he was reading Srimad Bhagavad Gita. But Lord Chaitanya was so impressed with it. So the devotee was saying that just the act of it, sitting in front of the Srimad Bhagavatam, is our earnest prayer to Srimad Bhagavatam or Srimad Bhagavad Gita, or for that matter, any of the scriptures, is to empower us someday so we can actually relish what Srimad Bhagavatam is giving about us. All of us, at least by the blessings of Srila Prabhupada and all of our gurus, we do have, and I'm sure many of you are in that place of relishing Srimad Bhagavatam. But for me, it's still a theoretical knowledge that what Srimad Bhagavatam is giving is far beyond, is quite relishable, is far beyond what I can grasp. But I'm still it's very much a theoretical understanding. So this, through this act of just the preparation and speaking on Srimad Bhagavatam, is nothing but my earnest prayer to Srimad Bhagavatam, so that one day, so the Lord can empower me. So one day I can actually relish what Srimad Bhagavatam is giving us. And the devotee was saying that for a normal student, it is important. But for a student who is struggling through that process, it is far more important to put in more and more effort. So I think just the reason that somehow I would be blessed with multiple opportunities of Srimad Bhagavatam is a proof that of my struggling position, where because I'm struggling so much, I'm like Srimad Bhagavatam keeps giving me that, because other than this, I'm not going I'm not a person who dives deep during the reading, other than these times of where I have to prepare and give the class. So it's kind of all the way proof that reflection of my struggling position and the mercy that Srimad Bhagavatam is giving is. And in extension of that, I also wanted to kind of humbly pray to all the assembled devotees, like many of the devotees whom I look up to, and many of the devotees that I call as friends are here. So I'm just taking this opportunity, just to kind of, I would say, request and beg for all of you to continue. I've been showering me with all of your blessings. I just wanted to, taking this opportunity, continue to shower me with your blessings so I can take more and more shelter of Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's a selfish agenda that I had for today's discussion. Now coming back to the actual discussion of what Kapiladev is giving us here. As I was preparing for this two verses, verse 27 and verse 28, I'm not sure how many of you know of this concept called as elevator pitch. So elevator pitch is something where, especially in the corporate world, where you might, the time that we get of these executives, which are the top leaders, might be like at max of 1 minute or 2 minutes. So they say that, let's say you bump into one of the executives in an elevator. You both entered the office at the same time, and somehow you just happen to bump into him. And all you have is, by the time you go to their floor, which might be less than a minute, or sometimes 1 minute or 2 minutes. So if you want to present any of your ideas, you just have that time. And how do you precisely and concisely convey the concept or understanding that you have? And that they call it as elevator pitch. And what Kapiladev is doing here in verse 27 and verse 28 is giving us the elevator pitch about mind. A slight deviation. Many of us who are from South India or from Telugu, there is this famous concept in South India which is called as katte kotte teche. So when when it is being referred about Ramayana, so they say that Ramayana can be conveyed in these three words: katte, kotte, and teche. Katte means construction. There are multiple meanings, but in this context, it is construction. Second, kotte means being like defeating, and teche means bringing back. So in concise, the Ramayana can be conveyed as the bridge was constructed, Ravana was killed, and Mother Sita was brought back. And then the whole beautiful story of Ramayana kind of expands. So similarly, what Kapilidev is giving here about the mind, which all of us have experienced and do understand, is quite a complex web of everything, quite difficult to even grasp. And But what Kapila Dev is giving here is that elevator pitch about mind. So in the verse 27, this is based on um, just breaking down the verse. It is again of the verse 27 is of breaking down as two. So in this elevator pitch, there are again four different sections. The first section of the verse 27 talks about explains the origin of the mind, which we have says manas tattvam ajayata. That's what he says, evolved. So what is the origin of the mind? That's the concept, the first elevator pitch concept that Kapila is giving. And then in the second half of the verse 27, he's explaining its attributes. And in the first part of the verse 28, he's saying who is the Lord of the mind. And in expansion of that, he's also conveying what is the process of controlling the mind. So when he's speaking about the verse 27, the origin of the mind, what Kapila Dev says is from the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind. And our acharyas explained this is nothing but during the creation process, when the Lord is infusing his energy and power into Prakriti, one of the creation that happens is also mind. So to put it into a kind of simple words based on how our acharyas is explaining, is origin. So the mind is originated through the infusion of energy and power of our Lord into Prakriti. And then when he's explaining about its attributes, he says, whose thoughts and reflections gives rise to desire. And and Srila Prabhupada kind of goes further into that when he's talking about the symptoms of the mind are determination and rejection. So it's the determination, which can be also be translated as acceptance or rejection. So we all kind of also hear this word of markata mana, which is like the mind is like a monkey. It is busy in accepting and then rejecting. So sometimes it is at one point I feel I need this. And after a few moments later, after some few days later, I might reject the same item. But after some moments or some days later, I might want the same thing again. So the mind is quite busy in accepting and rejecting in the same thing. And then a few moments later, and then hankering for the same thing again. And based on what Kapila Dev is saying, it is as also which are due to different kinds of desires, as Prabhupada writes in the purport. So based on the present desire that we have, we either accept or reject. And this is the attribute or the qualities of the mind. And coming back into the verse 28, now that we know, so for anything, right, we need to know what it is, what are its qualities, and if it is troubling us, then what is the process of kind of making sure it's in the control. And one of the main factors for to put anything in control is to understand who is the controller, because certain things can be controlled. Like if you want to turn on the TV, we need to know where the remote is. Without the remote or even understanding where the switch is, you just can't. Maybe we'll go to that point of AI where you just say turn on and then it will turn on. But at least at this point, we are not there, where we still do rely on the physical switch of the remote. So you turn on, so the controller, or so in this case, yes, we do want to control the mind, and we'll also kind of discuss why do we need to even control the mind. So the verse 27 then gives up that Aniruddha, which in translation is translated as like how Krishna is translated as the most attractive. Aniruddha is translated as the unconquerable Lord. And this unconquerable Lord is the Lord of the mind. He is not just Lord of the mind, but as Srila Prabhupada presents, he is the Lord of all the senses. The Lord of the mind is Aniruddha. So now, for the next 5 minutes, we'll kind of discuss a little deeper into the origin and the growth of the mind and further things. So I remember we were almost a few weeks back, we were discussing what Chandogya Upanishad explains. I think that was during the digestion process where Kapila was saying that bhakti, similar to how digestive system kind of digests everything without even the understanding of the person. Bhakti also, I think it was 25th chapter something. So we were discussing about the digestion process has how Chandogya Upanishad explains. And during the discussion, we were discussing how whatever we eat, the most gross part of it, or was it gross or the subtle? Yeah, the subtlest part of it, whatever the food that we are consuming, the subtlest part of it gets transformed into our mind. So many times we have been told that what we eat affects our mind, and in expansion affects our consciousness. And based on what Chandogya Upanishad is explaining, the origin of this mind is at the time of as the infusion of energy and power of Lord into Prakriti. And from that infusion, the false ego of goodness eventually gets transformed into the mind. So our acharyas explained that this is the origin of the principle of the mind. But on a specific personal level, what the food that we are consuming, Chandogya Upanishad explains that the food that we are consuming, the gross part, so just quickly, so the food, based on the food that we are consuming, the gross part becomes the excreta, and the subtle part becomes our flesh, but the subtlest of all becomes our mind. So, so that's how because of the food that we are eating, it not only affects our mind, but it actually becomes the mind. So that's the correlation of the food that we are consuming. So the food that you consume then affects our mind, which is kind of is driven based on the desires. So it's like a cycle of that never-ending cycle, that unless you kind of can pinpoint to this process of what Chandogya Upanishad is explaining of the food that we are consuming, it becomes like an endless cycle. And then it attributes of accepting and rejecting. As we all kind of very famously hear, the root cause of suffering, which in multiple classes and discussions is also known as Rompad Maharaj, especially in one of his visits to Naperville, was discussing in multiple classes on this point. Lord Buddha explains that root cause of suffering is desire, but Rompad Maharaj was kind of expanding on it. But based on what our Vaishnava acharyas are giving us, the root cause of suffering is not just desire, but the desire which is born out of ignorance. So the root cause of suffering is not desire, but ignorance. So in this case, the mind is affected by the desires, but the desires are born out of the ignorance of the reality. Because as Srila Prabhupada is also pointing out in the verse 27, he's saying that, but the material mind is not fixed. It is not fixed because our desires keep hovering. But the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. And how does that happen? It happens because through engaging in the process of devotional service, through engaging in the process of Krishna consciousness, what happens is we get more and more understanding of the actual reality. And yesterday in Sunday school, we were actually discussing about the Sakama Karma Yoga and how Krishna is telling Arjuna about the whole section where either you fight and you die, you will achieve heaven. If you win, then you'll achieve the kingdom. And in all of that, we were trying to discuss about the actions driven based on desire versus actions driven based on what is right, and what is right with the knowledge of what is right. So many times many of the students were sharing that it is easy to kind of do um, based on desire, because understanding of what is right and getting into that concept of gaining that knowledge is quite, that itself feels quite cumbersome. But in order to kind of get free from this loop of even just this understanding of the knowledge of what we eat. So it's not just some theoretical knowledge that many times we feel it's in spiritual circles that some certain statements are just made randomly. How does even the food, we all have experience, the food that we eat does affect our consciousness, but till this knowledge of what Chandogya Upanishad is explaining of the whole, how the digestion process kind of affects how it transforms the physical food that we are eating into the flesh or the mind, it might not make a lot of sense for many of us. So the knowledge is quite important to even understand the problem, and not just understand the problem, but also get a clear understanding of the solution. And then once we have the understanding of the growth of the mind, which is through the food, and the attributes, which is the accept and reject driven based on the desire, which can be purified or corrected through the knowledge. So what we are ignorant is if what is right. Again, expand kind of linking back to what we were discussing in yesterday. As long as we are ignorant of what is right, we will always be driven based on our desire, because for us that feels right. So the most important thing is to kind of get to that breaking that loop or breaking that chain, and kind of saying, okay, now this is the end. This is where I want to um, kind of get better in kind of coming out of this in this ignorant position. And finally, what the Lord Kapila is giving is that it's not just important to understand the mind or they understand the qualities of the mind, but it is important even for us to, it is all the more important, as we were just discussing about the knowledge, it is all the more important to understand who is the Lord, who is the actual controller that can control the mind. And as Krishna tells in Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, for him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. And how do we conquer the mind? Though, as Prabhupada is again giving back, correlating back that in the verse 27, the only possible way of controlling the mind is engaging in Krishna consciousness, engaging in the process of devotional service. And how do we engage in the process of devotional service? Is that completing of the loop of having that desire to understand the Lord. The material mind is, so as this is the statement that Prabhupada is making. The material mind is not fixed, but the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. So the only solution of breaking this loop is having this desire. Again, going back to the verse, the prayer that we were discussing from Chaitanya Charan Prabhu last discussion that we had. We might not even understand where we are, but all it takes for us to is to kind of approach Shri Radha Shamsundar and say that I don't know where I am, but I want to get out of this whole loop of getting driven by my desire. And all I can take is take shelter of Aniruddha, the Lord, the unconquerable Lord, who is the controller of the mind, and say that, my dear Lord, please help me. And so there are some further points that, especially just to kind of end this. So I think we are almost at this. So I'll just end with this point where when in reference to in the verse 28, when the reference is actually given for the autumn, so it's kind of correlating back. So this is the reference what happens when we, so we all understand, for him who has conquered the mind is the best of the friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So in giving the reference of the autumn, our acharyas tell that Kapiladev is telling for somebody who has taken shelter of this Lord, the Lord Aniruddha, what happens is their mind will become like these flowers that are blossomed in autumn, which are without any blemish. So their mind will eventually become a spotless place, which is completely filled with the thoughts of the Lord. That's the end goal for somebody who has completely achieved the best position of where the Lord is complete, where their entire thoughts, their entire being is just filled with nothing but the thoughts of the Lord. So that's the final aspiration. And to get there, this is the elevator pitch that Kapila is giving us. Understanding the mind, understanding that who is the Lord, and understanding the process of the Lord. And the process is nothing but just attaining the master of the mind. And with that, I'll end the discussion. But if there are, I'm sure there are a lot more devotees who can speak much in a personal and um, I would say a blessed way than what I could present with for somebody who is actually affected with mine. But this is the service that's quite nourishing for me. But if there is any discussions or comments that any of us would like to make.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, this is Sachi Sutadas. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhu, very, very inspiring class. Spiritual plus scientific. That really draws my attention very well. Thank you. And I really appreciate how Srimad Bhagavatam protocol is purely based on seeing through hearing. Like seeing through hearing, that is the way it is packaged. If we compare in a contemporary world, before the affordance of a TV, we are all very used to radio, especially we grew up by listening All India Radio. I remember, even if it is a farmer's program, if I have more homework, I tune to radio. Okay, so when we hear, immediately we call the concept called picturization. It's spontaneously the picturization comes into the mind, and we are more dragged towards the channel of a hearing, picturization, and fixedness. I really liked how our acharyas has framed this mode of perception for the recipients who are dull-headed, with a short span, short memory, and all those things. They know us, like the experience factor. It's how our acharyas understood empathetically on the recipients who are us, and the challenges which you brought out very well about the function of mind, which is acceptance, and the discriminatory factor of acceptance and rejection. And you also brought the point about the mind. I remember His Holiness Rompa Maharaj talks about the mind is a monkey. It's not a monkey, it's a drunken monkey. It's not a drunken monkey, it's a scorpion bit drunken monkey. So you can see the level of agitation and hovering from one to other, like how to balance and train, like that's a challenging aspect. Accept the challenge and progress, through the channel of a Srimad Bhagavatam. It's very inspiring, Prabhu. That's where my thoughts went into the concept of seeing through hearing. Thank you very much for giving the details about the mind and taking shelter of Lord Aniruddha. That's very useful information. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Gopalari, would you like to add or correct anything? Anybody else would? If nothing else, then I think we are 6 minutes over time. We can end it. Yeah, we'll call it a day. Once again, thank you so much for everybody for joining the discussion. Wish you all a wonderful day of Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarubhyasya kripa chindabhyeva patitanam
Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, wonderful class.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Wonderful class. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Shri Prabhupada ki jai.